Hello everybody, my name is Elliot Clark and welcome to the Operations Cabinet. Both Alex and I recently graduated from the University of Plymouth with a BA Honours degree in history. In my own dissertation, I looked at the role of Clementine Churchill and the influence she had over her husband, Winston Churchill's political career. In Alex's study, he looked at the effect of the Dunkirk evacuation on the RAF.
In today's episode, we're going to be going through our top tips for writing an undergraduate history dissertation. Tip number 1, working with your supervisor. One of the most important aspects of writing an undergraduate dissertation is to keep in constant contact with your supervisor, as well as taking all their advice on board. They are there to help and guide you after all. As such, if you cannot attend an in-person or Zoom meeting with your supervisor for whatever reason, keep them updated with your progress over email. They cannot help you if they don't know what stage of research or write-up you're at. If you are struggling to locate sources or examples for your work, ask your supervisor for advice. They'll be able to point you in the right direction for finding sources you may not have even considered yet. At one stage of my own research, I was struggling to find a particular source which wasn't available through our library. My supervisor was able to point me in the direction of a digitized version that I did not know was available at the time. It is also important to remember that writing a dissertation is a fluid process and can change significantly based on what you discover in your research. Don't be afraid to discuss any changes to your thesis or argument with your supervisor. After starting my research and finding an interesting thread, my own 12,000-word undergraduate dissertation ended up being based on what I had originally planned out as just one chapter in my initial proposal. So don't be afraid to focus in if necessary. Finally, I would advise submitting a draft chapter to your supervisor as early as possible. This can save you time in 2 ways. Firstly, your supervisor will be able to produce feedback on your work more quickly, allowing you to carry on with the writing process. Not only this, but you can then begin to write the next chapter based on their advice, meaning that there won't be as much need to edit when future drafts are received, as you'll already know what to include and exclude within the text. In my own experience, the draft of my first chapter requires significantly more revisions than that of my final chapter.
Tip number 2 is breaking down your chapters. When writing a dissertation, it helps to treat each chapter as if it were an essay, and break it down into the sections of analysis you will be evaluating. It's also important to plan ahead and not go straight into the writing process. By identifying key debates of the topic, you can use these as themes to structure the chapter. In doing this, it allows a more focused debate and reduces the pressure of writing, as you can write the chapter section by section. When writing a dissertation at either undergraduate or postgraduate level, it is important to consider the word count. Every chapter does not have to be the same length. For example, in my own experiences, my third chapter was more significant to my argument, so was therefore 3,000 words, compared to the second, which was 2,500 words. It's important not to cram information in. You can't provide every detail in a limited word count. If the topic is too broad, narrow down its focus. On studying a field which is already vast, focus on those areas not previously discussed in detail before. With the current pandemic, you may be limited on primary material, but by analysing those you've got in detail, you can develop an enhanced argument. A key aspect I used when producing my own dissertation was to write the introduction and conclusion last. The thesis and your argument will develop throughout the writing process. Waiting until all chapters have been drafted will result in a more developed understanding to illustrate in the conclusion and introduction.
Tip number 3, using online archives. Online archives are becoming an increasingly useful resource for historians, especially when you cannot visit them in person owing to the current conditions. They also offer several advantages that are not normally found in traditional archives. Online catalogues can easily be searched by keywords, dates, significant events, and figures, making it much easier to find sources relevant to your own work. Not only this, but some handwritten sources have also been previously transcribed by historians, making them easier to read or pick out key phrases from. However, it should be noted that these transcripts are not always 100% accurate and may contain errors, so it is best to use them for reference for seeking out other sources rather than copying them verbatim. It is also important to be wary that online archives are not always complete with the information they provide. Some files may show up on the system, but are not actually digitized, and may even be hidden behind a paywall, meaning that it will require an in-person visit to the archives regardless. Digital archives can also be used to plan your trip to physical archives once they reopen. This leads me on to the biggest piece of advice I can offer you all whilst conducting primary research at archives. Narrow down the sources you need to see before you arrive. More often than not, you will find yourself identifying a source which appears relevant to your work based on the title, only to find it offers very little information of value when you read the actual document. Try to collect as much information about each document as possible, even if a preview or summary is not available. Then you can decide which sources will be most vital to your study and, more importantly, which sources you cannot find in alternative locations. This is increasingly more important under the current conditions, which have imposed strict time and documentation limits even when archives are opened. In my own experience, I found myself sitting in the National Archives having requested a set of Air Ministry documents on pilot training, only to discover that they were written 3 years after the period I was covering, as the date had not been included in the original listing.
Tip number 4 will be looking at using bibliographies. When reading secondary material, a useful tip would be to look through the bibliography of the text to identify what sources the scholar has utilised in the production of their work. In identifying these sources, you can then use the reference to find further work produced in the field and develop a further understanding of the topic area and key texts already published. Furthermore, the bibliography can be used to identify new archives and collections which could be studied or visited to enhance your own study. In developing an understanding of the field, it is vital to evaluate where debates lie between historians. In analysing these debates, it's important to state your own opinion and not be afraid of challenging other historians' claims. In my own work, I have previously praised a book in one chapter, agreeing with the historian's claim, but in another chapter identified limitations in the same book. You will not always agree with every claim a historian makes, and it's good to identify this within your own work, as a result, increasing the value of your own project as a historical source. By questioning the value of a source, it allows you to identify gaps within the field and address these gaps in your own work.
This brings us on to tip number 5, save everything. It's important to make sure you back up your work at every stage of your research and in multiple locations. This could be on the cloud, in an email to yourself, or even on a physical memory stick or hard drive if necessary. Furthermore, when visiting archives in person, it is also good practice to photograph any documents you have viewed so you can go back and look at them later. This is not only useful if you are running out of time under the new time restrictions, but can also remind you of the context of your notes, especially if you don't end up processing them in your work for a few weeks or even months after your visit. It is important to note that some archives do charge a photography licensing fee of around £5 per day to take photographs of their documents, so it is best to check their policy before you visit. If you are struggling to reduce the word count set for your chapter, don't completely delete any of the writing that you cut out and save them in a separate document. Your information or argument may be useful for other chapters, or even when rewriting your first draft. In my own dissertation, I decided to move an entire argument from one chapter to the other as it made greater sense to the structure. This is work I would have lost had I not saved it. It is also good practice to save any surplus research that you do not use in your dissertation, especially if you were considering a postgraduate project. These sources may contain relevant information for future projects or essays. As I previously mentioned, I ended up looking at a document from the wrong year for my undergraduate project. However, I still took photographs of these documents and have now been able to use them for my master's research.
And finally, tip number 6 is focus on networking as a historian and using platforms such as Twitter to expand your reach. Twitter has proven to be a popular platform for historians, with many using it to discuss current projects, future publications, and current events. For students, this can open up new opportunities to speak with scholars and discuss your work with a new audience. In my own experience, I have communicated with historians throughout my field and across the world, which proved significant to my work and furthering my understanding of the topic and the world of academia as you correspond with academics from other institutions. The key piece of advice I can offer you is to engage with other historians online, whether that be contacting historians directly or by using the hashtag #TwitterStorian to gain advice and support from members of your field. This has proven particularly popular throughout the pandemic. Many of the archive centres also actively post material on Twitter, which can help you to identify new avenues and illustrate potential new online collections that you have not previously considered. As a platform, it can also be used to locate up-and-coming conferences and publications happening in the year ahead. During the pandemic, many conferences have taken place virtually, making them easier to access. While in lockdown, I have personally attended conferences to gain an insight into new work and network with other scholars.
We also feel that it is important to offer some more specific advice on helping you to write an undergraduate dissertation during the current global pandemic, as it is something affecting all young historians, no matter what stage they are at with their research. My advice before archives reopen would be to send them an email so they can keep you updated about when they reopen and the restrictions they will have in place. This will allow you to plan your future trip accordingly and save you time when you arrive. Not only this, but some centres may also be able to provide you with digital copies or scans of documents on request, if an archivist is available on the site at the time. The archivists themselves can also be a very useful source of information, as they can point out specific documents that may be relevant to your research, helping you save time when you go and visit them. Some archives may even provide you with a complete list of documents available on a specific topic, and save you the trouble of searching through their online catalogues for hours on end. On that note, a few months ago, I emailed Southampton City Archives about my master's research, and the archivist was able to point out a collection of documents relevant to my topic which weren't listed on their online catalogue. Had I not emailed them beforehand about my topic, I would have had no idea that these documents existed, and would therefore have not been able to use them in my own work. On that note, when physical archives are unavailable, it's best to seek out digital alternatives. At the same time, when the physical archives reopen, this will help you prioritise looking at sources that cannot be found online.
As with every year when writing a dissertation, but more importantly now during the pandemic, don't compare what stage of the process you're at with your course mates. Every project will work to a different schedule, whether that be down to personal deadlines, supervisor deadlines, or down to delays in archive visits. It's important to remember during times like these that everyone is in the same situation and will be experiencing similar issues and drawbacks. Try to focus on the sources you have access to and don't dwell on those you can't. Your supervisor will be aware of the limitations affecting students this year and won't mark you down for this as a result. Remember, your supervisor is there to support you and wants you to do well.
In that vein, it is also important to make sure that you factor in downtime for yourself, as if you continue to overwork, the quality of your work may start to slip and mistakes creep in. And, of course, most importantly, stay safe and continue to communicate with the university and your supervisor. They will be able to provide you with help and advice throughout the process of producing your dissertation, whether or not you are able to see them in person.
Remember, as Churchill would say, keep buggering on.
Before we conclude, we would like to add that if you have any questions or would like to ask us further advice, feel free to contact us on Twitter @opcabinet or send us an email at operationscabinet@gmail.com. Alternatively, if you would like to reach out to us individually for specific advice, you can contact us on our personal accounts at r56_Alex or at @ElliotClark_.
Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.